Welcome back, Caddy Corner, episode 32. Welcome back. What's up, Caleb?
What's going on?
What's going on? This episode going to be all about creating workflows. I don't really know how to explain what that is because I have a section that is called why you would create workflows. I don't know if you have like a definition that you're in love with.
Yeah, I wrote down a definition.
Okay, hit it. That's perfect.
Okay, so what is a workflow? You may be wondering. What I have here is a workflow is a representation of a process.
Okay, that's a good way to think about it.
And so from the research that I've done since I've started doing my research on workflows to create this episode, it is mostly represented by a diagram, the little boxes with the arrows that point to the next box. And so in my brain, ever since I saw that is now how I imagine workflows. So yeah, that's what a workflow is. What I have is it is a representation of a business process.
Sure. And I even just think about it more of like, whenever I think of like workflows that I personally have and stuff, I just think of them as processes. Like it's almost like a machine, if you want to think about it like that.
It's exactly like a machine.
Where you just have very kind of structured and scheduled things. So we came up with some ideas. I have a like why you should care about your workflow section, and then I also have a how to make a workflow section.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I have.
All right, cool. Let's start with why do you want to have a workflow?
Okay.
Because I wrote some thought-provoking stuff for this one. So
go ahead.
Okay, cool. So number one reason why you want to make a workflow and why you want to iron out and make your workflow very efficient is because time is your greatest asset. And so you have to leverage that asset.
Yeah, 100%.
So you don't get that back no matter what. And so efficiency is the name of the game, which is the other reason why you want to have a workflow is because efficiency comes from honing all of the different aspects. So whenever you are building your workflow, you look at the processes that you have within maybe you're an athlete and you have different aspects. You have like your training aspect, and you have practice, and you have team bonding or meeting or whatever, and you have like recovery. You have to look at all those aspects and hone them and make them efficient so that way your workflow can be good. But without that, you're not leveraging your time as efficiently as you can. So that's why workflow is important.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the reasons why I think that everyone should have workflows is because everything runs on a workflow. So even the things that you think might not have a workflow connected to them, they definitely do. And so, like, personally, why you should want to have a workflow is because it shows you all the steps to complete certain processes. And it also can help you understand how you can contribute to a certain process if you're working, like, with a team. So you can, like, see all the steps and be like, I know how to do this one, so, like, I'll work on that, you know? So it can help with that. And it just helps you stay on track, like what you said, because time is money, and you have to have money to live.
Good point.
So,
definitely good point. And I think the key kind of to think about whenever you're thinking about creating your workflow, and this applies to literally every aspect of everybody's life ever, is you just want to be efficient with your time.
Yeah.
If what you're trying to do is be productive. So that is kind of where this entire episode comes from and kind of gets to that kind of idea, I think at least, is efficiency is what you're kind of looking for. And this episode's all about honing in your productivity practices. That's a weird way to word it, I feel like. Productivity practices. I feel like that's a weird word. But
I think that sounds perfect.
Think so? I think so too. It's just weird that those two words go together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any more whys or not really?
No, not really.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to go into keys about how you make your workflow. So my first key, and this is I think where you should start, is understanding your relationship with time. So for you, maybe it takes you longer to do certain tasks or shorter amount of time to do certain tasks. And so understanding where your amount of time needs to be allocated is very important whenever you create your workflow. Because if you don't need to be spending time on a certain aspect of your productivity system, then you shouldn't, because that time is then being wasted. And so you don't really want to do that. And where that comes from is self-awareness, understanding how long it takes for you to maybe like make your lunch or eat your lunch, or how long it takes for you to like efficiently study or something like that.
Yeah.
Is how I thought about it a lot. So you just have to understand your relationship with time. And this is a part too that you can't just Google. Like your understanding and relationship with time is not something that is just out there for everybody to hear
Yeah,
or everybody to
100%.
know, because it's different for everybody. So I think
Yeah.
it's super important to understand your relationship with time.
Yeah, I have this right here in quotes, and it kind of goes exactly with what you were saying. And it says, workflows change based on what works and what doesn't work. So you have to be sure to take time to analyze
Yeah.
your workflow.
It's a good point too. Because
So
that's true. Because what you basically just said was that you should, after you do your workflow for a little bit, you should take a step back and look at it and see if it works or
yeah,
not.
make sure it's working.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a very good point that you just made there. And so I kind of have like 3 components that I think go into creating a workflow.
Sure.
So I'm just going to run through those 3 real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
So the first one I have is input. And input is something that helps you complete or initiates a task. And so I have an example that is going to stay the same through all the points, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about the example for input in like the specific example right now. So the example is a student wants to change their major, right? So the input for a student wanting to change their major is submitting the paperwork to apply to be able to change your major. So like submitting it to the admission team. And so the second step is transformation, and that is changes that occur to result in the output. So the example for this, with the same example kind of going here, is the administration is processing the paperwork. That is the change that's happening.
Right.
And then the third thing is output, which is the result of input plus transformation. And so the example would be your major or change of major gets approved, basically. So that is like a very simple way to look at it, and it goes in a ton more detail because the transformation process has a lot more steps than just like processing the paperwork. It's like checking your GPA, checking the amount of classes that you've taken and like passed or whatever, and all those things go into transformation, but I just wanted to make it like super basic.
Yeah,
so
I think that's really good.
Yeah. So those are 3 of the components that go into creating a workflow.
Sure.
So I just want to go ahead. So
Boom, bada bing, bada
go
boom.
ahead.
I think another point that I wanted to really make too, and where I leaned into my notes and stuff is very much for building personal kind of systems and workflows and stuff, is efficiency over flash, meaning the function and productivity or ability to do well in a situation should always come over the like looks or the aesthetic or the amount of like flash that goes into it and behind it. Does
Yeah,
that make
100%.
sense? I think that is super important, just because what you're doing within your workflow should be designed to be as efficient as possible, not as cool as possible.
Yeah.
That's a concept that can be applied to everything. Another one that I think that like same concept applies to is like what we talked about last week with gear. You should buy gear that works, not looks cool. Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends. It's a mentality shift, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important to be efficient, and that doesn't mean that like you can't have like maybe a workflow example is you like designed your perfect office, right? And everything is in the right place based off of your workflow. That doesn't mean that your office has to look like, it doesn't have to look like an industrial box. It can look like whatever you want it to look like.
Right.
But the efficiency should come first and the productivity should come first.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is my step 1 on how to create a process or how to create a workflow. And step number 1 for me is select the process. And so something that I thought about, like whenever you're trying to make something personally, is whenever you're trying to think about a process that you should create a workflow for, think of a problem that you have and then the steps on how to fix the problem. That's where I would start if you're having a hard time creating a workflow. Just find a spot in your life where you're kind of like struggling and then figure out how you can make it better and then create a workflow from that point on. So that's my step 1.
Well, and my next point piggybacks off that really well, which is be a problem solver. So even taking it kind of a step into the workflow, which is kind of where I am in my steps here, is that there's going to be kinks and there's going to be problems and there's going to be things that happen throughout learning or trying a new workflow out or anything really. Even in just like life, there's going to be problems. And so you really have 2 choices. You can either fix the problem or you can hide. And one of those options does nothing and one of those options does something. So solving problems is very important in all aspects of life, but also especially in this, because having problems and having kinks in the system, those do not help the workflow function in an efficient manner. And
Right.
efficiency is the key here. So,
Yeah, definitely.
Be a problem solver.
Next here on my list, I have gather information. And so here I just have a couple questions to think about for gathering information on what information you should gather. So the first question you should think about is the end goal is. Whatever the end goal is should be your last little box in your diagram. That should be what you're striving to do. And then you have to create little steps to help you get to the end goal. And those are your other little boxes. So in the other little boxes, some things to think about are how long each step should take. That's good information to have because time is valuable. Mm-hmm. And so to keep yourself on a schedule, you need to know about how much time each thing should take. So if you're going over the time, then you know something needs to change or whatever. And then also what is going to be involved in each step. So whether it is something that you have to buy or someone who has to be there or whatever, those things should be written down also so that you don't have to waste time to figure out what you need and all that good stuff. So gather information.
Another point that I think is super important, and this is kind of coming in all aspects of it, from the beginning to the middle to all of it, is you should always have a plan for how you're going to execute things within the workflow and also for the workflow in and out of itself. So whether like what the workflow is actually doing is important, and that kind of comes off of a plan. Like we're going to do this for 3 months and we're going to see what happens, and this comes out this way on work and stuff like that. Also, if there's a problem within the workflow, and especially if there's other people involved, like if it's if it's a team, if it's an organization, if it's a company, having kinks or problems within the workflow, those cause big discussions. Like there's a lot of steps that it takes to get there, to get those problems fixed or whatever. So having a plan for how you're going to address situations is always important, and also having a plan as to what you hope to get out of the workflow, as to what you hope that the workflow can benefit and stuff like that. Those are super important things. So you should always have a plan.
Yeah, 100%. Step number 3 here on my list is to make the diagram. And so you use all of the information that you gathered and then also the process that you've selected to make this diagram. And so it's not just going to be one diagram for all of your workflows. Everything is going to have a different workflow. And so you're going to have to, in my brain, how it works for me anyway, is like I would have to make a bunch of different diagrams.
For sure.
And so maybe that works for you, maybe it doesn't, whatever. But this is just my list here. And so something that I thought about is something that we talked about in the last podcast is make something as big as it has to be, but as
the way that I word it is different in different applications, but it, like in the case of a video, it should be as long as it needs to be, but as short as possible.
Okay, so that is exactly how I thought about this diagram. It needs to be as big as it needs to be, but as small as possible. Right. So basically, make it big enough so that you can understand it, but not so big that it becomes messy.
Yeah.
Just because if you work somewhere and you have to make a workflow for different people, you have to make sure that these different people can understand what you're trying to get across. And also, if you have a workflow for something and then it's a thing that you haven't touched in a long time, if you go back to that, there's a chance that you're going to be like, what was I thinking here?
Exactly, yeah.
So you have to make it clear to other people and also to your future self what needs to be done. And so that is something to think about for sure.
I even think from the perspective of scale is important too. Like the bigger that your workflow is, the more opportunity that it has to mess up, because it's harder to it's easier to oversee things.
Definitely.
And that exists in every single aspect. Like if you look at big machines, those have bigger chances to break. And the reason is because there's just more things going on. It's harder to keep up with everything, every aspect, because it's so big. So it's definitely important too. And this is something that I don't really have written down, but I agree with it, is starting kind of small in the beginning and slowly building your workflow up rather than starting huge and trying to scale it back down
Yeah, definitely.
is much more difficult. Because
100%.
and that I think happens for everything. Because if you have a huge amount of things that you have to sift through or find problems for, and then you scale it down, and then you realize that there weren't even that many problems in the first place. You could have just got going. So that's a super important point, I think, too. Scale is very important. But actually, I will read that one in just a second. But my last kind of practical point here is that you're going to get in what you get out of your workflow.
Definitely.
So even if you have this perfect plan, you have this perfect workflow constructed, you know exactly what everybody needs to be doing. At the end of the day, if there are human beings involved, it comes down to execution. So if you're not able to execute the workflow, and especially if you're not able to execute the workflow for a consistent and sustainable amount of time, then it was pointless doing it in the first place.
Yeah.
So you have to build workflows and practices and everything, habits even, that will be able to be done efficiently and also at a high level forever, ideally. So
Yeah.
you're going to get in what you put out of it. You're going to get in you'll get in what you get out. I'm bad at reading.
You'll get out what you put in.
That's what I meant to write, but that's not what I wrote at all.
Good
but
job.
you'll get out what you put in, and that's super important. So, boom.
Nice.
Yeah.
My last little point here is something that we've covered a little bit earlier today in this episode, but I'm going to recover it in a more deeper action here, and it's to analyze. So after everything is said and done, and you've been using this workflow for a specific amount of time, you have to have the self-awareness enough to sit back and look at this workflow that you've created and be able to point out the flaws. So you have to be able to point out the weak points and then make them strong. And that does take self-awareness, and I understand that is not easy to do for humans. And it is a lot easier, I would say, whenever you are working with other people,
For sure.
other than whenever you're working personally, because you're going to create a workflow that you want to work. And whenever it doesn't work, then it's kind of like a punch in the face that it doesn't work, and you're not going to want to tell yourself, this could be better, you know? But whenever you're working with a team, there are people who aren't going to really care about your feelings that much, and they're going to be like, this doesn't work, let's do this instead. And you'll be like, okay.
Yeah.
But those are things that have to happen. You have to be able to focus on what is weak and then make it strong. And like workflows change all the time. And so you have to keep changing it and keep using it to keep changing it so that you can finally get to one that you know works every time, you know? And so analysis is so huge, just so that you can be able to make the changes that you need to make to stay productive.
I even think, too, whenever you do get to that workflow that works for you, it's probably not going to work for you forever.
Right.
You're still going to have to pivot and change and make adjustments.
Yeah, that's another thing, too. Humans change. The world changes. There's new technology that gets made all the time.
Your industry can change.
Yeah.
I mean, anything can happen. So you just have to be quick and nimble on your feet. And I think that is more relevant today than it ever has been.
Yeah. 100%.
So my last point, and this is kind of more of just a way to think of things all the time, it's more of a mentality thing, is don't let your workflow intrude on your own personal time. So don't let your work become your entire life, unless that's what you just want to do, I guess. But whenever you're designing your workflow, make sure that there are elements, added in for like going to eat lunch, because that is important. You have to be able to do as a human, or just don't allow there to be overlap with like your personal time that you have to have every single day for your whole life. I think that's super important, because if you don't, you will get burned out and you will not want to do it anymore. And that is hard, having to find a new thing that you do for the bulk of your time. So
yeah, that is not an easy thing to do.
So don't let your workflows, or really anything, just intrude on your personal time that you allot for yourself every day. That's super important, I think. That's my last point.
Good deal.
Yeah,
Well, that's all I have.
That's all you have too? Cool.
Yep.
So that is going to be it, ladies and gentlemen, for Caddy Corner episode 32. A little shorter this time. Going to do a little bit of science-y vibes for Caleb and I, see what's up, even though we hate science. So
yeah, we actually think science is fake.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. But thanks so much for listening to this episode of Caddy Corner, episode 32. Holy crap. We are going to be back every single Friday for the rest of our lives doing this exact same show. So if you're into that sort of thing, click the follow button if you're on the audio platforms. Also, rate and review the show. We read all of our rates and reviews. So do it if you're into that sort of thing. Everybody that we've read has had a cool name.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's also a cool thing. Also, if you're on the YouTube channel, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, do all of the regular YouTube stuff that people do. And I think that's it. We also have After Hours, which is our fun, laid back, cool show that we do every Wednesday. Entertainment show that we do every Wednesday, and we've only missed it once. So with that being said, I'm Austin, he's Caleb, and we'll see you guys next week.
Peace.